Ready to take some amazing wildlife photos? I have a lot of tips and tricks for you in learning how to photograph wildlife. This video is going to go over some of the tips and tricks that I picked up while on safari in Kenya. Now, I am not a professional wildlife photographer. I am a professional photographer and recently went on an amazing trip to Kenya in the Masai Mara to photograph lions and leopards and cheetahs, elephants, zebras, giraffes, and so much more. What I want to do in this video is give you some tips that I learned that are hopefully going to help you if you are starting or continuing your journey into wildlife photography. And by the way, thank you so much to Nik Software for sponsoring this video. I'm going to show you a lot of the images that I photographed and how I edit them using Nik Software. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's start off where everyone wants to start off. What camera should I buy? What lenses should I bring? Now, first, if you're going to photograph on safari, that means that you're likely going to be in safari vehicles. In fact, I don't know how else you would do it. So let's just say you're definitely going to be in safari vehicles, which means you may not have a ton of space for gear. And depending on how you're getting into where you are going on safari, you might be on a small plane, somewhere where you can't be bringing roller bags worth of gear. So packing light and smart is step number one. For a camera purchase, of course, we would all love to photograph with the Canon EOS R1 that I photographed with. It is absolutely incredible. One step down from that would be the Canon R5 Mark II. I also brought that body, but those are pretty expensive top of the line cameras. Like I mentioned, I'm a wedding photographer and a corporate photographer or professional photographer, so I already have that gear. Now, if you are just starting out photographically, your budget is going to determine what you can bring. But I do recommend, if it's your first time going out on safari, to spend more money on your lenses than your body. Now, the camera body that I think would be great if you were on a budget, maybe going for something used, would be the Canon EOS R6. That camera body you can probably get used for like $1,500 right now, and it's absolutely excellent when it comes to autofocus. Autofocusing on animals that are far away, moving quickly, and moving behind objects like brush or other animals, those are going to be your biggest challenges when trying to get the shot that you are dreaming of. So a camera that can handle that type of autofocus is absolutely going to be key. Let's take a look at some of these photos that I'm going to edit for you, and you're going to see exactly how that focusing was really important and crucial in these moments. So if you haven't heard about Nik Software before, let me just give you a brief overview. Right now, I'm in Nik 7 Silver Effects. What's really interesting about Nik Software is you can come into different modules in here, and one of the other ones I'll show you later is this sharpener output. Color effects is really cool. What it'll do, it will save anything that you're already working on, and then you can drag in multiple images if you want to. And then we have all of these different presets, filters. Anytime you pick one of the presets on this side, you have a plethora of different ways that you can mess around with the look of the photo. Looking at the warmth of the photo is a big one for me, so I love the brilliance and warmth settings here where I can mess around with the saturation, the perceptual saturation, which is a really unique tool that a lot of other programs don't have. So just being able to do that, and then of course change the opacity to get the look that I want, is a lot of fun. Now I want to show you some black and white photos here. Boop. Yeah, I knew this would be fun, especially with this cloud right here and the little bit of vignetting that I had from the ground. So let's just pull in. I want something with that nice dramatic sky. So not something super, oh, there we go. And look at the ones with the borders too. You know what? I kind of like this. This has like a very old world film feel to it. Let's go with this one, and then let's do a little bit of customization to bring out the cheetah here. For now, the protection, I'm gonna pull up the shadows. So now I've got a little bit more attention there on the cheetah. Another feature that I like is save preset. So I'm gonna hit save preset, and let's just call this Safari, black and white. and we can save it with any local adjustments that I did. I'm not going to choose to do that for this one. And then when I pull in something else, we can go into our personal and you'll see my Safari black and white. So maybe I'll pull in this other cheated one that I have here, similar lighting, and I'll pull in my own Safari black and white, and bam, now I've got a really great set of matching images. So that's what I think about camera bodies. Now let's move on to the lenses. And like I mentioned before, the lenses is where you really want to spend your money. Now, depending on what you want to do as a wildlife photographer in the future might determine how you're going to acquire these lenses. Don't think that, hey, I'm going on safari, that means I have to buy a $10,000 lens like I took. I took the Canon RF 100 to 300 2.8 with a 1.4 extender on it, letting that go to a 420 millimeter focal length. Basically, I'm able to zoom in a whole lot and get really close to animals to get beautiful shots of their personalities, their face, and just, photographing at a safe distance. But I did not purchase that. Actually, I just purchased it today. When I brought it on safari, I rented it. I actually borrowed it from a friend. So while I want you to invest more on the lenses, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to buy a lens. And it doesn't have to be the best lens of all time either. A lens that's really great for this type of photography would also be a lens that doesn't necessarily have a static aperture. Because you're outside, you're photographing outside, you have a lot of daylight to work with. So you really don't need to have a lens that goes all the way down to f2.8. And having a variable aperture, an aperture that moves maybe between 4.5 and 6.3, is absolutely doable in this circumstance. So if you get the chance to rent something like the Canon RF 100 to 300 2.8 LIS USM lens, that lens is absolutely stunning. If you can rent that, go for it. And I do recommend either the 1.4 or the 2x extender that can go with it. And you can pop that on or off just depending on how far away you are from the wildlife and how close you want to get. Now, if you're really just hell-bent on purchasing a lens, here's a recommendation for you. I am a Canon girl, so I am recommending Canon lenses, but of course you can take these millimeters and apertures and look for other brands if you want to. Canon does have a lens that's about $2,700. Again, buy it used maybe, or borrow it or rent it, or if this is your splurge and you want to spend maybe $5,000 total, maybe this is the lens that you go for along with that R6 camera body that I mentioned. The Canon RF 100 to 500 lens, it's a 4.8 to 7.1 with image stabilization, is a great lesser budget lens for wildlife photography when you're going out on safari. That range of 1 to 500 is amazing. And yeah, do I want to go all the way to 7.1 while I'm zoomed into 500? Probably not. But if you're using a camera like the R6 or the R6 Mark II or higher than that, you're going to be able to go high on your ISO somewhere around 1600, 2000 with no problem at all. So having a higher aperture value like 7.1, if you're zoomed all the way into 500, won't totally kill your image when paired with that camera body. Now let me give you another long lens that might be useful for you that's just a little bit more expensive, under that $2,000 mark. Canon also has an RF 100 to 400 5.6 to f8 lens. It's a lot less expensive, only about $700 at the time of this recording, but again, when you're zoomed all the way into 400, it is going to f8. Will it make or break your shots? If you're photographing more towards nighttime, maybe, because f8 is pretty closed down. But if you're photographing in daylight, I don't think you'll have a problem. It's not going to give you the smoothest of all backgrounds that there could possibly be if you were photographing at 2.8, but that's why we pay so much money for more expensive lenses. I mean, I could be recommending, the RF 1200 f8, and that's a $20,000 lens. That's overkill. That's overkill for safaris. I don't know what that's for. Something I've never photographed. Another lens that you're going to want to have is something in that mid-range wide. Now, a really great lens that would pair nicely with any one of those lenses that start at that 100 millimeter range would be the Canon RF 24 to 105 f 2.8 lens. This is an absolutely beautiful lens. It's a little bit newer when it comes to Canon lenses, so I don't know that you will be able to find it used, but you could definitely rent it. That's gonna cover you from 24 millimeters, so some of those wide shots, those landscapes, all the way to maybe 500 if you went with that second lens recommendation that I gave you, or 420 if you're going with that first lens recommendation and the 1.4 converter. So that's a wide range. Those two lenses, really, it's all you're going to need. And of course, you could have two bodies and then just pick up, you know, whichever one has the lens on it that you want, or you could change lenses. Things do move fast when you're photographing wildlife, but for the most part, I had enough time to be like, okay, we're stopping over here where we found these giraffes or found these lions, and they walk pretty slowly when they're not trying to kill you or kill anything. So just taking a second to switch a lens, I don't think will make you lose your shot. I mean, it might, things happen, but for me, that worked absolutely fine. Let me show you some of the landscape photos that I shot with a wider lens so you can see what I mean, and we'll edit them in Nik software. All right, so I just pulled in two different images here, two different landscapes. I think I'm gonna go with this guy here and just start looking at all of the different options. I feel like I'm done. I feel like I just click that and I'm done. I mean, that's the best thing about, you know, one of the great things about a program like Nik software is that, you know, sometimes you do just click and you are done because it's already done so much of the thinking for you. Anyway, this is the Nik 7 Viveza. I don't actually know how to say it. It's Viveza. Viveza, I think. We're gonna go with Viveza. They can correct me on that one. Doesn't matter. This one is really great for landscapes. I really love working with this one and the different presets that it has here for landscapes. You can see all the different adjustments that I can do on the side here. The warmth is the one I'm going to play with the most. I think everything else is pretty good. Maybe bring up the shadow ever so slightly so I can get a little bit more detail in the grass. But I don't want as much detail as to see more of the elephant. I really liked that silhouette there. So maybe I'll just kind of bring down the sky a little bit so I can get more of these clouds in here. And then in this case, we could go ahead and switch over to Nik 7 Define. And it's going to save all of my settings that I have here. We can use this to reduce some image noise. I don't recall, let's see what I photographed this at. You know, it was late in the day. Okay, I was at ISO 100, so you're not going to see much noise here, but I actually see some, like right here, don't you? Right in that area. So let's actually measure it. Let's measure it automatically. And it's automatically going to create a denoise profile. So it'll just, even at ISO 100, it's just going to smooth out the image here, because we do often get noise even in circumstances like this, and we can mess around with the contrast noise and the color noise. But let me show you a better image. That's why we pulled in this one over here. Here you're going to see the noise because this one, while I photographed it at ISO 100, I had to pull up the exposure a bit here in the, here in the trees because I did not want to have totally blown out trees. So you can see some noise in here, and I am able to automatically, it's already done it for me, automatically measure that denoise and mess around with it. So it's just a little bit smoother without losing the detail in here. Let me show you a better example with a higher ISO. I can actually rate these by ISO, so we'll get a better example here. Let's go with, oh yeah, let's go with this guy. 2000 ISO. That one's good. Or let me go with this, maybe our friends that were cooking in the kitchen. That was 5000 ISO. Now this was taken with the Canon R1, but you see the noise that just popped up right there? And then automatically, it already lowered that for me, and I can mess around with it. So let me just show you this before and after. Look at that difference. Look at the difference in the noise that it's able to take out of the image. It's absolutely, you don't see it as much here, but the second you zoom in, you realize exactly how much this program is working for you. That denoise is impeccable. At 5000 ISO, being able to use a program like this and get that kind of results, I mean, we can shoot 5,000, 10,000 ISO, no problem. Now, if you haven't heard about Nik's software before, it really is accessible editing that makes controlling and editing photos in post-production accessible to everyone. Everything is extremely intuitive and easy, lots of presets that you can choose from, so it takes a lot of the guesswork out of editing afterwards. There are preset libraries for instant transformations. It's really just intuitive, so you can mess around and it works very quickly, so there's no lag, and you can see what you're actually doing to the photos as you're doing them to help you learn as you're editing. Sharpener Pro, in addition to fixing my giraffe, by the way, it also has specific outputs for sharpening images based on where they're going to go. Like, is it going to go on a display? Is it going to go on social media? You can use their specific output automations for that and be done with it. Now, what I haven't showed you here, because we're dealing with wildlife photography, is the fact that you can batch edit. Nik's software allows you to edit large batches of photos. It's effortless and it turns hours of work into minutes, but also a creativity booster for busy photographers. Like I mentioned, I'm a professional photographer. I have clients. So when it came to editing my wildlife photos, I couldn't spend hours and hours and hours on images. Nik's software allows me to edit really nicely without having to dedicate that much time to it because I can batch. Now, if you're more advanced, of course, you can integrate Nik's software with Lightroom and Photoshop and seamlessly add it to your workflow. I definitely had a lot of fun in color effects, but there's also analog effects. And I did this a little bit with the black and white photo where it replicated that nostalgia for me of being in the darkroom and having that rough border around the black and white images of the cheetahs. But analog effects actually does that specifically, where it's going to replicate different types of film on your photos. Let me actually show you what that looks like, because that's just a ton of fun. As someone who started out as a film photographer and really loves the look of film, but doesn't always have the time or the budget. So just take a look real quick at what Nik Analog Effects does. Not only can you throw on these antique blurs, oh, I mean, look at this. This is like exactly what I remember. And I'm not saying you would use this for client work, but it definitely gives that nostalgia to it. The black and white, that like super metally look of the black and white and the dust and scratches. But aside from being able to do something like this, and then of course just customize it to your heart's content, because over here on the right side, anytime you click any one of these, you have a million different ways that you can adjust it. You can adjust your edges, you can adjust your toning, you can adjust really absolutely everything. But besides that, down here you also have your camera kit, which is going to give you basic adjustments for all the kind of different things that we used to do all the time and still do. I mean, we can add bokeh, we can do some more dirt and scratches work, we can mess around with the exact film type that we want, and I mean, so many different things that we can do just based on adding this to our camera kit. So what it's doing every time I click over here, it's adding some functionality here. So now I can come over and I want to play around with the film type. I want to look at how much grain per pixel or the hardness here and the way that this film looks color-wise. Just so many possibilities, and it really is so nostalgic for those of us who are film photographers, and film has made such a comeback. I know a lot of you are film photographers, and while photographing wildlife, I probably would never photograph in film because it sounds really difficult, but now as I say it out loud, maybe it's a challenge. The truth is you don't necessarily have to in order to get that look, and Nik 7 Analog Effects helps you do that. If you haven't checked out Nik's software, by the way, you can give it a try. I have a 15% discount coupon code for you right there down on the screen. I know you'll love it, even if you're someone that's getting started in photography, whether it's wildlife or anything else. Really intuitive, easy to use, and a lot of fun. It opens so many creative doors. I think you'll have a blast. So just use that code JOY2025 and it'll give you 15% off. Okay, so that's it for gear, cameras and lenses. Now, how do we set our camera so we're going to take the best photos? First thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you have animal tracking enabled on any camera that you have. Any of the newer cameras, especially mirrorless cameras, have this feature. So enable animal tracking auto focus. I also recommend that you enable servo focus, which allows you to lock focus onto the subject and it continue to track that motion of the animal as they move or as you move. It's going to give you a lot more images that end up being in focus, even if you or the subject is moving. Not that you'll be moving that much, you keep your butt right in that safari vehicle. As far as camera settings go, what you really want to do if you are just starting out, I highly recommend using one of the exposure presets. You can use an exposure preset that is set for sports. If there is one for wildlife, that's great, but both of those are usually going to put your aperture a little bit lower and your shutter speed a bit higher. Another option, you could also go to shutter priority, and you would change your shutter depending on which lens you have on. If you have that 24 to 105 range on, then make sure that your shutter speed is no lower than 1/200th of a second. Things move pretty quickly, so you just want to be able to capture that motion. Now, if the animal is actually moving, you're going to want to go maybe to 500th of a second to make sure that you're not getting any motion blur in addition to getting any camera shake. Both of those things result in a blurry image, and your shutter speed is a way to fix that. If you have a longer lens on, let's say you have that 100 to 500 and you're zoomed all the way in at 500, at a minimum you're going to want your shutter speed to be at one 1/1000th of a second, but 1/500th of a second, 1/800th of a second, 1/640th of a second, like somewhere in that range is just going to give you a nice crisp image, because the more you zoom in, the more the little shake that your hands might make, the breathing, your heart beating, all of that might transfer to a little bit of camera shake and ultimately result in a blurry image. So a higher shutter speed is how you solve that. And if you're in shutter priority, you're going to let your camera figure out the rest of everything else. Now, if you're a little bit more advanced and you want to go into manual exposure, I recommend setting your aperture first to as low as it can be. Keep in mind that it might change if you're using a variable aperture lens as it zooms in and out. So set your aperture first, then set your shutter speed to make sure you don't get that motion blur depending on what you're photographing and how fast they're moving and how far away they are. And lastly, set your ISO. And just know the limitations of your camera. Now, all of this sounds great, but I just mentioned thousands of dollars worth of camera gear. Can you apply all of this and still buy something camera lens in the $2,000 range? Yeah, you absolutely can. Some of the things that you will expect to sacrifice would be how sharp the images are. If the noise in the image pops up at higher ISOs. So what I want to do right now is show you a little bit of Nik's software that deals with sharpening so you can correct those problems later. Now, another thing that's really cool about this, especially for this photo here where the giraffe's head is just not quite as sharp as I would like it to be, I can come and switch over to sharpener output or pre-sharpener, and it's going to save my settings that I just did in Nik Color Effects and bring it over to the sharpener, where I can come in here and I can sharpen the image. Oh my gosh, just look at the giraffe's head right here. Watch when I just go boop. Look at that sharpening. That's just absolutely nuts. So the sharpening feature, really, really cool. Just being able to save images. You know, we can't all always buy a ton of camera gear that can get us the sharpest images that we want, but looking at that before and after, I mean, it's crazy. Just watch the swipe. Boop. It's just bringing that picture completely back to life for me. So that's what I have for you. Let me know if you have any questions about photographing wildlife. Again, I am not a professional wildlife photographer, but I did have an amazing time going on safari in Kenya just a couple of months ago, and I wanted to bring that experience to you, give you some suggestions on how to photograph, what to photograph with, and how to do it without buying a $20,000 lens. I mean, hey, if you can, go for it, because it's awesome. Make sure you hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.